if you want to learn the fundamental principle that is going to help you more than any other, I believe, when it comes to leading people and ultimately reaching your biggest goals and helping your people reach their biggest goals, it's communication. Today's guest, Vija Williams, who manages 8 brokerages, is a part of 13 different companies, teaches what she's learned over the past couple of years, a deep dive study of communication. You're going to love this episode. It's going to change your life. I mean that. It's going to change your business, going to change your life. It's fabulous. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Think Bigger Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Justin Stoddart, and honored and thrilled today to bring somebody that many of you know has become almost a household name when it comes to real estate in the Northwest. Her name is Vija Williams. Before I fully introduce her and talk about the amazing topic of communication that we're going to go into depth today, I want to remind you that inside of the Think Bigger Real Estate group on Facebook, you're going to find snippets of this episode and other episodes that will allow you to easily implement and apply the things that you learn. Again, we're surrounded by big thinkers here in the Think Bigger Real Estate Show, and today is no exception of that. Again, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you all, reintroduce to you all, Vija Williams. Vija, thank you so much for coming on the Think Bigger Real Estate Show.
Thank you so much for having me. And that was very flattering. I'm not sure it's true, but it was, thank you. Very nice introduction.
So for those that maybe need a reminder, in fact, you probably don't know all the things that Vija does behind the scenes. I knew she had a big title with the Ben Kinney company. I've heard her speak at different events. It wasn't until really I kind of extended this invite to you that I really kind of learned behind the scenes of all the things that you do. So for those that are in the audience wondering, like, what all is it that you're managing and helping lead? So Vija, you lead 8 brokerages, which consists of 1,450 real estate agents. You're also involved in mortgage, title, escrow, your own real estate team, Amplify, which is a company empowering women in business. And then you have your own podcast, Empire Building Podcast, with some other amazing hosts. I think we're all just in awe of the fact that, number one, that you do all that you do, and number two, that you're so generous with your time to come on and feed all of us on this amazing topic of communication. So again, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to preface this by saying I lead the leaders. I have amazing leaders that actually lead our market centers. We call our offices market centers in Keller Williams world. And I have amazing leaders. So really I lead the leaders. And I think that's important to know because I really want to defer to all the amazing people in my life, that I get to work with. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's really ties in well with our conversation today. I don't think anybody can succeed at business over a sustainable period of time without surrounding themselves with amazing people, right? I know the organization that I'm a part of, Old Republic Title, and the amazing assistant that I get to work with, the people that I report to, they're just phenomenal leaders. And as a result, it tends to attract other phenomenal people that want to be a part of that culture. And you guys have done that both within the Ben Kinney companies, now within Place. For those that are maybe still curious a little bit about kind of how Place fits in with Ben Kinney companies, experience kind of growth, experience real estate group, all that. Like, talk to us a little bit about what Place is, just so people kind of have some context around that.
Yeah, I think Place is the future of real estate. Place came together when Ben Kinney team merged with Chris Suarez's Experience Real Estate team. And they became what I think is the largest expansion team network in the nation. And when they came together, they formed a new brand called Place. And the idea of Place is to really kind of be that back end administrative operational part of the team, so that teams, the people that join us at Place tend to be already doing 20, 30, 40, 50 million, sometimes higher in volume already. And then they come to us and then we just take them to that next level, 100 million, 200 million. And a lot of the ceilings that teams hit are operational, right? We have really talented salespeople that get into real estate. They're amazing at building their business. And just when it gets to the point where they're probably like, hey, if I really want to grow this, I may need to actually start hiring listing specialists and replacing myself. We find there's a little bit of a ceiling that they can hit. And that's really where we come in to help, power them, right? They, in many cases, they keep their team identity. And they're just powered by Place, and it can depend on the situation, but it's been amazing, and I really think the future growth of real estate is going to lie in these big teams powered on the back end like that.
I think it's a fascinating model. I've always been kind of enamored with this expansion model because, again, the real estate industry does tend to have a ceiling, looking at it through traditional lenses, right? Where you have very talented people. And at the end of the day, oftentimes your customers want to be served by those very talented people. Those very talented people, as you mentioned, don't always have kind of the attention to detail and the operations chops in the background, and or they just can't manage it all, even if they do have those chops. And so to be able to have kind of a back-end support team that takes that off the plate of big time producers to allow them to continue to scale and grow and enjoy their life in the process, right? So they don't sacrifice everything. And that's one of the missions of this show, is to help people to pursue success and significance, to know that they can pursue, their biggest ambitions without giving up things that matter even more, like health and relationships. So
That's right.
I love what you guys are doing. I have become friends with Chris, have the utmost respect for him, both personally as well as professionally. And I'm always kind of at the edge of my seat every time Ben speaks. I don't know Ben personally well, but I'm just impressed with the caliber of people you guys are attracting. And I think, again, that ties in with our conversation today, right? It's about communication. None of that happens if there's not good communication. I know that's really a point that you wanted to drill home. We could have gone 1,000 different ways, and this podcast would have been valuable, because having you speak on those things, there would have been a ton of value. But this is a topic that you felt like was a foundational piece that if people don't get this right, everything else fails, right?
Yeah, that's right. And thanks for acknowledging that. I'm always happy to come back and talk about tactical industry stuff. It might be fun for you to have a panel on, to talk about what's happening in the industry. And I'd love to do that with some of my fellow place agents and friends too. But, it's really interesting when we talk about communication. You said, Vija, whatever you want to talk about. I'm indulging myself today. This is my passion topic. And it's really the reason I think I've achieved the level of success that I have. Not that I'm saying that's in the most humble of ways. And it's also a topic that I think isn't as sexy, right? So when you title this podcast and you say it's about communication, I don't know if people are going to be like, what we could have said, Justin, is I could have said, hey, we're going to title this podcast How to Make $100,000 this year, and you would have had your number one podcast, and I'm aware of that. I personally think this can make you more.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the sizzle of a lot of other topics. And I know that because not only do I have a podcast, I do webinars every week for agents, and I know the topics that sell, right? And communication isn't necessarily one of them. And for me, it's a funny story. Do you want to hear the story about what kind of, I've been really studying communication for 2 years. It's kind of been, I don't know if you guys are like this, but do you ever go through life and you kind of get a passion topic that you'll spend a couple of years on? It kind of becomes something you want to master. It's like your pursuit of mastery topic. And this has definitely been mine over the last few years. And what happened is I was an agent in our Keller Williams offices, and Ben Kinney bought our office in 2012 and started coaching and mentoring me. We became friends. Finally, in 2018, we start working together. That was when I took this position. So overnight, I went from being an agent with a team of 5 or 6 people to, at the time, 6 offices. We now have 8, but 6 offices and thousands of agents overnight. It was, it's a lot, right? So it was a lot. So I did what you would do and anyone would do in that situation. I really spent the first 4 weeks meeting with everyone. I just started listening. I mean, it's what anyone would have done. I must have had, I think I counted it once, it was either 27 or 29 one-on-ones. And when I say one-on-ones, some of them, all my team leaders, I took off-site and we met for like a half day. Those like many hours. So finally, I scheduled the meeting with Ben. I'd done all my meetings. I'm like, okay, I drove up to Bellingham. It's about 90 minutes away. And we had this 2-hour block scheduled, and we were going to go over all of the, what I discovered and make sure that we were, clear on priorities, right? What did I learn versus what did Ben think my priorities should be? We're going to have one of those meetings. So I get up there and I'm like, I'm so excited to go over this and have 2 whole hours to talk about like what we want this next year to look like. And Ben's like, me too. That was funny. He did not do that because he doesn't do that. So, he's like, yeah. And he goes, actually, I have a present for you. And we were in a conference room and I'm like, okay. So he goes back to his office comes back. And I should have prefaced this by saying I was working literally, you guys, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm serious. It was a new job. I wanted to prove something. Like I was working 7 days a week. My family was like, Mom, we know you're just going to be busy. Like I was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Right. So by the time I got up there, I was a little bleary eyed. So he comes back from his office and he's got a stack of books. And I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Like, wow. That's awesome. 6 books to read right now. Okay. Like not actually, that wasn't going through my head at all. I was like, oh, FML, like, I can't read 6 books right now. So I'm like, thank you so much. And then I have, for my own sanity, because I was just so stressed, I set him down on a chair. I couldn't see him. So we go through the meeting. It was great. Drive home, plop him on my counter. And when I get home and I go to the dinner table, so eat dinner with the family. And then after dinner, my husband goes, who got you all those books? Or did you buy those today? And I'm like, what books? He's like, the books on the counter. I didn't even know what they were. Right. And I'm like, oh, no, Ben gave them to me. He goes, and I was like, what? And I looked, do you want to know the titles? Let's see if I can remember them all. How to Say What You Want to Say in 30 Seconds or Less. The Intelligent Executive, the Articulate Executive, Business Communication, and Simply Said. Oh my gosh, there's more. It was all books about communication. So I was like, oh my gosh, like what? I thought this was one of my superpowers. Like what? So I texted BK, and my husband's name is Ben, so I call Ben Kinney BK. So I texted him and I go, wow, I just kind of absorbed those books you gave me. Is that how this is going to go? Is this going to be like passive aggressive management, And he said something very, very complimentary. And, he said, you're already, an 8 out of 10 on this. You get to be an 11 and the world will be your oyster. This is what you need to study and learn. So always coachable, always humble. I try to be. And so I said, okay. I read every single one of them. And one of them, a book called Simply Said, I have recommended to hundreds of people. I've read it 3 times now. I've actually listened to it once and read it twice. And my copy got coffee spilled on it, and it's dog-eared, and it's all scribbled. And I think that the last 2 years, my growth has been exponential because of my communication skills, that I switched from being natural and organic to like studying and being purposeful about, right? And so I've learned some things that it's like my passion to share. And so that when you ask me what topic, that's why this is my favorite topic.
I want to point out something, and then I've got a question, kind of a follow-up question for you. The thing that I think is really interesting is that oftentimes we try and identify what are my weak links, and we go and fortify those. And what Ben taught you and what you've now embraced and taken on, which I think ties in very nicely with the whole concept of this expansion concept, right? Is that you don't try and make everything a 5, right? What's your 8? How do I make that a 10 or 11? And then I find other people who their thing is what my weakness is, right? That's how you really excel. And I think also live a good life. Again, it's almost the mantra of expansion, which is no, you find out what you're good at and get really, really great at it. I want to ask kind of a question, because I think this is super important when it comes to communication. Oftentimes we think of communication as what we're speaking, right? What we're saying. I think communication is also what we're hearing and internalizing. And I want to go back to that moment where you felt like maybe a message was being shared with you from Ben, right? How did you feel inside? Because again, as part of the Think Bigger Real Estate Show, our thoughts are directly tied to our emotions. And you could have kind of closed up at that point and not been as coachable. I want to kind of ask you, what did you do at that moment? What were you feeling, and how did you change those feelings so that they reflected the story that you wanted to live out, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So what you're asking is what's the leadership lesson in that story? Aside from communication. And by the way, I'd never thought about that with expansion and with place. You're 100% right. It's about get better at what you're good at. I never thought of it that way. And with that, and we're going to go through, I'm going to go through some of my top communication tips. And you actually mentioned one of them. Listening is number 2. So just to cut to the chase. So here's what I would say to all of you leaders out there who heard that story and went, I don't know if I'm brave enough to do what Ben did, at some level, right? What I would say is that when you deposit enough into the relationship accounts of your people, you're allowed to withdraw. And if you're uncomfortable taking that withdrawal, you have to ask yourself, have I deposited enough with them? I mean, by the time I started working with Ben, he had been my primary coach and mentor and helped me build my business from 9 million. He helped me build it from 9 million to 70 million in 4 years. We talked on the phone all the time. We texted all the time. We saw each other. We have some similar friends, a lot of similar friends. And so by the time he hired me, he just had that permission, to do that. Right. But you don't have to have worked with someone for 8 years or 6 years, whatever the math is on that. You don't have to work with anyone for 6 years to do that, right? You need to just be sure that you have that level of that you're constantly depositing into the relationship account of your people, and then you get to withdraw, right? And it's the same with sales. We talk this language. I lead team leaders and I lead sales agents, and if you go for the close too soon, and you see that body language that you don't want to see, you're probably withdrawing before you've deposited enough, right?
Powerful concept, isn't it? As leaders, we all need to be looking at who do I serve? And I think that's, again, as I look at the people that I'd be willing to run through a brick wall for, they've really spent their career removing obstacles from my path so that I can recognize and be in pursuit of my biggest potential, right? And when they come to me with some constructive criticism and feedback, I'm all in, right? Whereas when they haven't, and I feel like it's about their agenda and I'm a pawn in their game, it's a different feeling, right? And I don't take it well. So let's get into these points of communication. I know we've
so I pulled out 5. I mean, I have more, and we actually have a podcast coming up later this year just on this topic that I had the honor of writing. But I pulled out 5 for your audience, Justin. So hopefully it'll be good.
Let's hear it.
You want to hear it? Okay.
Let's hear it.
So number 1, what's your guess on number 1? Because you're a communicator, right? What's your guess on the number 1 most important part of communication? This is bad for me to do. I'm putting you on the spot.
No, this is great. So I would think that in order to be a good communicator, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at your example, right? Of like, you need to know your people because the message has to be catered to who it is.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good job.
You got it. It's number 1 is make it about them, not you. Make it about your audience. So you need to, everything you say, do, write, or whatever it is, Justin, I am focused on our audience. I am pouring into our audience right now. How can I teach people who want to learn about communication? It's not about me. The only reason my story even matters is that hopefully someone might resonate with it and learn from it, right? This is about you and it's about them today, right now. But sometimes our audience is just one person, like right now, in a sense, there's you and me. We're one people. And then we have I know your podcast is uber successful, thousands of people that will watch or hear this, right? And so, we need to speak their language the best we can. We need to know what their pain points are. We need to know what their challenges are. Why are we giving features? We need to know what their benefits are. I always tell my salespeople, do not sell the benefit of the meeting. Don't just sell the meeting, right? Sell the benefit of the meeting to the other person. So when we're talking about communication, I think the number 1 rule is make it about the other person or the audience. It can be a big audience or small, and not you.
Well,
it's simple, not easy.
I think it's really hard to say what the benefit is if you don't know who the people are, right? I mean, again, I looked at your example of going and spending time with all these people. You had to actually find out what their pain points were and what they were great at before you could give a benefit that was actually relevant to them. So if you don't know your people, like, it doesn't work, right? Communication doesn't work if you don't know who you're talking to.
Yeah. And Justin, if you look at when you asked me to be on the podcast, and thank you again for doing that, I do get requests, like this. Do you remember you said, Vija, what do you want to talk about? What was the first thing I asked you? I said, well, what does your audience want to hear?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you tell me, because I don't know your audience like you do, right? What do they want to hear? What's your number 1? Remember I asked you, what's your number 1 most listened podcast? I need to understand how I can pour into them. It's not about me, you know?
Awesome. Great lesson. Such a
Yeah.
good principle.
Well, you already know number two because you already guessed it. And number two is deceptively hard. And number two is listening. Be a good listener. And I have to tell you, this is so hard, you guys, because the squirrel brain will go, you get all, when I interview people one-on-one, just like Justin's doing, like Justin's using so much energy right now to not drift and to listen to me. It is really hard work. Your brain doesn't want to go there. And most of us are not trained to still our minds to do that. I'm not. I mean, I have over the last 2 years, I worked super hard at it. And it's why if you say you're a new podcaster, for example, or you're doing webinars for the first time and you start interviewing people, it's going to be one of the hardest parts of it is actively listening. Like you have to listen will wear you out. I recommend that when you're starting, you actually don't schedule anything right afterwards. I see Gary and Jay Papasan on stage sometimes at our events for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And I am in awe that they're not like curled up in a heap backstage afterwards, because it takes so much energy to actively listen like that. There's a lot on listening. There's a really, really good book out, and I'm going to blank on the name. We can put it in show notes. It talks about validating when you listen. So Justin, as I'm listening to you, it's not probably enough for me to listen. That's the first step. What I need to do to really connect with you is I need to validate you. Like, good point, Justin. Wow. Great question. Well said. Those are validations. And there's a whole book on that. That's a really short, great book. And I'm just blanking on what it's called, that talks just about how to listen and validate. So we'll put that in show notes for you guys.
I love that point. What triggered for me is I was working really hard to keep my brain in our conversation. I was taken to Brazil. This was I was 19.
It didn't work.
I was 19 years old, and I was serving a church mission there, and I didn't speak Portuguese, but I was trying really hard to speak Portuguese because everything that I was supposed to do there was to be serving people and teaching people. And it was fascinating to me how carefully I listened, and how at the end of the day I was exhausted because I was staring at them, trying to read not just what the words that were coming out of their mouth, because I didn't understand all of those, but the intonations, the reactions, the responses. I was probably the best listener that I'd ever been in that period of time, because I had to be, or I was completely lost. And I think about that lesson that you just shared with us, which is actually being 100% present. And if it doesn't feel like work when you're listening, you're probably not doing it right, because there's so much.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
On who's speaking, that it is hard work, because your mind by default tends to drift, right?
I love, I'm going to steal that. That's really good. If it doesn't feel like hard work listening, you're probably not doing it right. It's not natural. And it's not natural for a lot of our audience, because a lot of our audience are in the real estate industry. We are people, what we would call high I on the disc. And it's especially harder for us, right? Meditation and contemplative prayer are two things that can kind of help train you a little bit to kind of calm your mind. I know we're on a time crunch, so I'm going to keep going if that's
number 3. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Don't fear the pause. This is number 3, right? Be a purposeful communicator and don't fear the pause. Part of the reason Ben gave me all those books is that I am a natural interrupter. I am so excited about what you're saying and so excited about what I'm about to say that my natural state is to interrupt. It took me a long time to get out of that habit. And part of that is that I noticed that people who are not interrupters, you have the cadence is a little different in a conversation with a high bubbly, like my type of a personality who maybe is prone to interrupting, and someone who's a more thoughtful, purposeful communicator. And I started noticing that, that I would talk and, Ben does it really well, actually. He'll kind of go, and then he talks, right? And I started using that more and more on webinars, on the podcast. And it's a habit that over time, I've just kind of shed that need to feel like I have to always be jumping in to fill the space with noise. So not just in your not just in your communication, not just in your public speaking, I mean, even in your one-on-one dialogue, because to me, if you're truly active listening, Justin, there has to be a pause, because now I'm going to think about what I'm going to say, right? Whereas if I'm not active listening, what's going on? I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. And again, I'm not saying that that doesn't come into your head. We're all quick thinkers. That's going to happen. That's okay. But don't fear the pause, especially if that doesn't come naturally to you.
I love what you said there. Fear the pause, as if pause has, if there's, as if that invalidates your ability to keep up in the conversation, right? This fear of like, what happens if it goes quiet? I think any of us that are in conversations regularly, we have this fear of like, what happens if I don't know what to say? And pause is almost seen as a validation, the fact that I don't belong in this conversation. I don't know what to say. I don't have a solution for you. I can't keep up in this conversation. Whereas what I hear you saying is actually the pause is validation that you're actually communicating, that you actually do belong in the conversation. You're actually trying to bring value because you need time to process. Powerful stuff.
That's absolutely correct. But it definitely took me a while to appreciate that, right? When you're kind of a natural, I was a more in, like, I'm not saying we don't have communication where we're in a flow and there's not a lot of pauses, but don't fear it if you need it. Don't fear it if you need it. I think it shows someone a lot of respect if they see that you're really thinking about your answer and you really absorb what they say. And sometimes I'll even say out loud as a form of validation, Justin, I want to absorb that for a minute. That was really powerful. I have a lot of thoughts running through my head and I just want to take a second to absorb. And by the time I've said that, I've now probably thought about what I'm going to say next.
Powerful concepts. Yeah, I love the way that you, this whole time I've been observing your communication from day one when we first met, interacted. You aren't just teaching these principles, you're living these principles. Like all these points, I'm saying Vija does that, Vija does that, Vija does that. So
well, Vija tries to do that.
There's no try, Vija. You're doing it. You're improving the way in which you do it. It reminds me of actually the good family that has taken my family in here for the past week because we've been evacuated from Oregon wildfire smoke. It's my sister-in-law. She's probably one of the best listeners I've ever been around. When I talk, she stops, sits down, and looks at me, and then says, "Wow," and she'll listen. And it's an impressive thing, but it's reminded me of how good she is at listening. So anyway, thank you for that.
It's really impressive. People that do that naturally, I'm in awe of, right? And you feel so special and you feel so good. And it's just remind yourself how special and good you feel. And that's how we want other people to feel, right? When we're talking with them.
And it goes back to this concept of leadership. If you want people to follow you, they have to feel like you care about them and you're serving them. And I think giving them that respect and that attention that I'm yours and you are most important right now, and validates that. So
yeah,
so good.
Yeah, that's right. Well, number 4 is less is more. And this is very hard for me. It is very, very hard to construct a tweet versus a long Facebook status, right? It is very, very hard to be concise in words if your name is Vija. Like it is just, it's all of this is kind of a lifelong journey for me. So I'm just on a constant struggle to use as few words as I need to. I actually have toned down my vocabulary too. I think I've turned a corner on that. I prefer to use words that are a little simpler in that I want to honor my audience and I don't want to use words that might alienate them. I've been a lifelong reader. I don't know how many, I read a lot of books. And so I think I was getting into some heavy vocabulary. Less is more, right? We don't need to always use big, long vocabulary words, long phrases. I found myself over the last few years getting better at chopping down my sentences on email, right? On just everything I do, I'm trying to be more concise and clear. And that's been really huge.
It's been difficult for me. I'm just wrapping up a book that's getting ready to be published here soon. And it was amazing.
Congrats.
Thank you. The feedback that I got from day one is you're very wordy, you're very verbose, you've got to cut it down. That's something that I'm really working on now. And it's become very apparent to me how that's a struggle that I have. I tend to put more words than necessary in each sentence. So thank you for sharing that. What a powerful principle for all of us.
I relate to that. And I think a lot of us relate to that. It's easier. It is actually easier to write longer, which seems counterintuitive, right? Than it is to be concise. And again, we can just be students and we can be in a lifelong pursuit of mastery on this. So the last one, and it's hard to put these in order, but the last one is to tell stories. And I started this off actually with a story, didn't plan it, but started this off with a story. And, a lot of your listeners will remember that story more than they'll remember this conversation, right? It's human nature. I've read 2 or 3 books now just on telling stories, and there's some great, I'm starting to get down a rabbit hole now on myth and the power of the hero's journey. And, stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. They have points. They need to be relevant. I'm starting to get to be a nerd on this, but the bottom line is that if you're in sales, I know there's a lot of great script masters out there. I mean, there's some really great scripts. I started telling stories years ago. I find stories are much more effective in objection handling than scripts. I found in my presentations and in my webinars and our podcasts, people like the stories. And how I remember it is I grew up, going to church, and as a kid, sometimes we'd have to go sit in the adult church. Sometimes we got to go to kids' Sunday school, but sometimes we sat in the adult church, and I was always bored. I was a little kid, but I always remembered the pastor's stories. I couldn't tell you any point of the sermon, but I can still remember some of those pastor stories from a kid. And it's the stories that stick with us the most. So getting to be concise and clear and using relevant stories to illustrate a point, just like I did at the beginning of this, are really powerful and important, and probably paint the best picture in your audience's head out of anything you can do.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I agree 100% that that's really, it goes from the mind to the heart when you hear other people's interactions with a particular topic.
Yeah.
This has been such an amazing just demonstration of your value that you bring to the marketplace. I want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. Yeah, no, I mean that wholeheartedly. You're a big thinker, no doubt. You live your life thinking bigger. What advice can you give all of us on how you continue to think bigger, how you continue to expand your possibilities? What does that look like for you?
It's a really easy answer for me. And that is really take a look at the 5 people you're spending the most time with. That's how you're going to predict your future. You are most likely going to turn into the 5 people you spend the most time with. I just read a study, Justin, and it talked about it's not just the 5 people anymore. The studies show, and ironically, they did it on obesity. And the study showed that it's their 5 friends and their 5 friends of each of those 5 friends. They had the little exponential tree going, that it impacts you more than almost anything else in your life, right? And so if that's your family, how are you leading your family? Are you teaching them to think big? You can shape them right around you, but outside of your family, who's feeding you? I mean, I am surrounded with people. The top 5 people I communicate with every day push me every day. I mean, look what Ben did when he handed me those books. So those aren't easy. It's not easy to hang out with Ben Kinney every day. It's not easy to hang out with Sarah Reynolds, Wendy Papazan every day. It's not easy, but it's awesome, and I love it, and it's challenging, and it pushes me every day. And I know this it kind of might even sound crass, but my net worth has grown more in the past 12, 18 months than it's grown. I don't even know. And it's really because I'm with people who are like, don't go out and buy that purse. Don't do that. No. Like, we're here, you're here, you want to get here, don't go out and buy that purse, do this and do that. I mean, I'm just constantly being pushed in all aspects of my life. And that's my answer.
Yeah, you have been a total gift to us today.
Thank you. Wow.
I mean that. This has been absolutely fabulous. Not only have you taught us the foundational components of communication, but you've helped us to think bigger. I'm very grateful for you. If there's anything that we can ever do as an audience, me as an individual, please let me know. And I want to remind the audience of the simple request that I make every time. There are 3 simple words, and they are go, think bigger. Vija, thank you so much for helping us do that today. It's such a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you, Justin.